This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Good morning. See a few people coming in the back. I note that I feel like I'm in the classroom. Everyone sort of sat in the back of the room, but that's okay. I think we can all be heard. My name is Jim Hughes, and I'm the interim dean here at the law school. And on behalf of the entire law school community, I'm delighted to welcome you to commemorate the Turner Environmental Law Clinic's 20th anniversary. And today, I'm delighted also to say that we have a number of old friends in attendance, old friends of the Turner Clinic, including Bill Busby, a former law school colleague, and the founder of the Turner Environmental Law Clinic, and founder of the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Program. Also, Gwen Keyes Fleming, I don't know if she's here this morning, but I saw her last night. I think she's supposed to be here today as well. And Ann Hurd, class of 1973. We also have in attendance some of our former clinic directors, Julie Mayfield, Mary McLean Asbill, back there, and Jim Grody, right here. And we have long-standing supporters of the Emory Law faculty, staff, and students. We're also pleased to have in attendance some of you who are visiting law school for the first time, including our distinguished speaker, Lois Gibbs, other panelists, environmental lawyers and advocates, Turner Clinic partners and clients, and numerous other professionals and folks interested in exploring the role of environmental law and environmental justice. In addition to giving us the opportunity to gather to celebrate, anniversaries provide us with a time to reflect and to look ahead. When the clinic was established in 1998, with the generous support of the Turner Foundation, represented by Rutherford and Laura Turner Seidel, Julie Adler, and Jean Ann James, it brought environmental education out of the classroom and into the field. The clinic pioneered a model for training students in the practice of environmental law, providing pro bono representation to clients in need, and conducting legal work on a wide range of issues affecting the health of our environment and the future of our planet. The clinic has trained over 250 students in the practice of environmental law, many of whom have pursued environmental careers at law firms, corporations, government agencies, and nonprofit institutions across the country. As a longtime faculty member, I'm very proud of our current and former clinic students who are here today, and to know that they'll continue to do the good work of the clinic in helping to save our planet and to ensure the future for all of us. I'm also proud to be a member of the Emory University community. As many of you know, Emory University is a leader in the sustainability movement, and that is a well-deserved reputation. I hope you have an opportunity to wander around the campus and you'll see these things in evidence. Throughout the 20 years, the Turner Clinic has grown in size, sophistication, and impact while staying true to its original goals of protecting the natural world and educating the next generation of environmental attorneys. With a reputation for innovative outcomes, locally, regionally, and nationally, and a strong desire to pitch in wherever help is needed most, the Turner Clinic is taking action today that will lead to a brighter tomorrow for the environment. And that brings me to the question of why we're all here today, to start important conversations about what exactly that brighter tomorrow will be. Now I'd like to invite our current clinic director, Mindy Goldstein, to the podium to welcome you and to introduce our speakers. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome again to all of you. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Mindy Goldstein, and I'm the current director of the Turner Environmental Law Clinic. I joined the Emory faculty in 2008, so I'm celebrating my 10th and a half anniversary here as well. I wanted to take a moment and thank some additional people for making this conference possible. First, I want to thank our panelists and keynote speakers, many of whom are in this front row, who flew from all corners of the country, notwithstanding the fact that TSA is not fully functioning at this time. I would also like to thank the clinic's incredible staff, Michelle and Melinda, who are out front and checking you guys in. I wear many hats at this university, but conference planner is not one of them, and this would not have happened without their incredible hard work. I'd also like to thank Corky and Scott, our AV people, who are somewhere around here making all of this happen. In addition to that, I would like to thank our sponsors, Andy Thompson and Smith, Gambrell, and Russell. I don't know where Andy is, I saw him somewhere. Keenet Howitt and Emory's Office of Sustainability Initiatives, and of course, the Turner Foundation. As Jim mentioned, the Turner Clinic would not exist without the Turner Foundation's critical, ongoing, and steadfast support. And finally, I'd like to thank our hosts and other sponsors, all of whom are in your program and listed somewhere in there. Oh yeah, and thanks to whoever made those programs. They were really great. So today I will play several roles. I will be the timekeeper and MC, and I will help you kind of along as things change. I will serve as a panel moderator, and I will also serve as a loud advocate for public interest environmental law. For now, though, I want to turn our attention to the reason and the topic for which we've assembled. As we celebrate the Turner Clinic's 20th anniversary, we have an opportunity to consider where the next 20 years will lead us. We sit at a pivotal moment with issues of resilience, climate action, and equity dominating our national conversation. Environmental lawyers will no doubt play a crucial role in ensuring we have clean air to breathe, safe water to drink, healthy food to eat, cost-effective and non-hazardous sources of energy, and viable plans to safeguard our resources for future generations. Later this morning, we will have time to discuss the role of environmental law clinics and advocacy efforts in promoting environmental protection. But because we are here to celebrate the Turner Environmental Law Clinic's anniversary, I wanted to put some context around the words we are about to hear. Each year, the Turner Environmental Law Clinic provides 4,000 hours of free legal representation. Our work focuses on a wide range of issues. We negotiate contracts, file comments on proposed legislation, testify before agencies, and litigate in courtrooms. And while we think of these environmental representations as focused on protecting natural resources, air, water, and land, at the heart of many of these representations are people, children, and communities. The clinic is committed to helping people directly impacted by the pollutants we emit in the air, discharge in our water, and dump in our landfills. Given the important work the impact of this work on people, it seems especially appropriate to welcome as our keynote speaker, Lois Gibbs. Lois Gibbs is a true trailblazer when it comes to thinking about the connection between people and the environment. She has dedicated her life to giving a voice to people whose lives have been unfairly and disproportionately impacted by environmental harms. Ever since her first forays into environmental activism in 1978, Lois has been an influential force in the environmental justice community. She is known by many as the mother of Superfund, as she successfully battled local, state, and federal governments, forcing the toxic cleanup of a waste site in her neighborhood of Love Canal. As all of my environmental law students in this room know, this battle directly influenced the passage of CERCLA, forever changing environmental law. This is the 40th anniversary of Love Canal, and so it's an apt way to celebrate her anniversary as well as the clinic's. And in the 40 years since Love Canal, Lois has continued to fight. She founded the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, where she helps organize grassroots campaigns, many of which focus on protecting health and safety of children and communities at risk. She has received well-deserved recognition for her incredible work, including the 1990 Goldman Environmental Prize. Often called the Nobel Prize for the Environment, this prestigious award is also celebrating an anniversary, its 30th. Lois was one of its very first recipients. The award recognizes environmental leaders and change makers from across the globe. As we celebrate so many anniversaries, the 20th of the clinic, the 30th of Goldman, and the 40th of Love Canal, we have so many reasons to be proud. We have made large leaps in environmental protection efforts. but some things have remained unchanged. Many communities are still disproportionately impacted by environmental harms. And no matter the future of environmental law that we envision here today, I have no doubt that incredible people like Ms. Gibbs will continue to play a role in empowering citizens throughout the country to advocate for a clean and healthy environment. At the conclusion of Lois's remarks, we'll have some brief Q&A, and there'll be microphones floating around for those of you who would like to ask her a question. So now I ask you to all please join me in welcoming Lois Gibbs.
So I don't like podiums, so I'm an organizer. Organizers do not stand still. Organizers do not stand behind podiums because we all have to be one. So thank you so much, Mindy. Thank you to the Law Center for inviting me here for the anniversary. And it is the 40th anniversary of Love Canal as well this year, of the crisis of Love Canal. And it was 40 years ago that I got my start. And none of you were around. I mean, some of you might be around, some of the gray hairs might be around, but you weren't around to help me. And so I am just really excited that all of you are here and working to bring justice across the country. So I want to talk about Love Canal because as we move into the future, as we're thinking about what do we do over the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, we can't forget the past. There are lessons to be learned in the past and critical things that happened at Love Canal that are happening today that need to be changed. And they're not going to be changed overnight, and they're not an easy change, but they definitely need to be changed. So I'm going to talk about Love Canal, but I'm also going to talk about how those same things are happening today all across the country. And I think our friends from WAND who are in the back of the room, who have been fighting nuclear waste forever, could probably tell exactly the same story as I do. So Love Canal was 40 years ago. At that time, I was a stay-at-home mom. I had 2 children. My husband worked at the industry at Goodyear Chemical. We believed, as people believe today, that the smell in communities, that the smell of chemicals is the smell of a paycheck. The smell of chemicals means a good economy. The smell of chemicals means you're going to be able to feed your children. You're going to be able to pay your mortgage. You're going to be able to buy a car. I travel across the country at least once a week somewhere, and that belief is still there. That belief is still there. That is something we have to deal with in the future. We have to deal with the fact that we want the jobs, we want the facilities, but we don't need to smell or be exposed to these chemicals. And how do we do this? Our laws are woefully inadequate. So at Love Canal, when we smelled the chemicals, we smelled like we could buy a new car next year, right? It was good. My husband worked at Goodyear, and he would come home, and as most married couples or partners, I sleep on one side of the bed, he sleeps on the other side of the bed. His side of the bed was always yellow. The sheets were always yellow. And when I would take them, because I was dowly domestic, I was really a good housewife. I wanted my sheets to be clean. I wanted to hang them outside. Well, when I took those sheets and I put bleach in them, they turned brown. Only on his side of the bed. And so I sent him to work and asked, why is it? What is it in your body that you're getting at work that's making my sheets yellow? I am not thinking about this man as being poisoned, right? I'm thinking about my sheets being yellow. It's embarrassing. And I don't even know why I'm sharing the story, but I'm going to share it anyhow. So he goes to work, he asks, and he comes back, and he says, well, I asked your question. I said, yeah, and what'd they say? They said the chemical I'm being exposed to is the same chemicals they use in that tanning lotion where you get a tan without the sun. And I said, really? He said, yeah, and what they said is that you should just hush up and be quiet and be happy I have a job. And I said, and do you feel that way? He said, oh, of course not, I don't. I care about your sheets. Let's buy yellow sheets. My point in the story is that all across the country, this continues to happen. People are coming home from work. People are being exposed at work. People are bringing it into their home. I laid next to this man while I was pregnant with my children. What chemicals were coming off of his body and getting into my body? What chemicals were being washed in my washer machine when he'd bring his work clothes home and I would clean them for him and then put my baby's diapers in there? This is happening today, still. And so when we organize in the chemical cities, we really need to be sensitive to that reality. That is a reality. It is a reality today. So to go back to Love Canal, besides my Dolly Domestic tours I had, I was raising 2 children, and my children were getting very sick. My son had epilepsy. He had grand mal seizures. He had a liver problem, a urinary problem. He had an immune system, depressed immune system like you would see in a HIV person. My daughter had a rare disease. On Friday she had bruises, on Saturday she had more, on Sunday her entire little body was covered with black and blue marks. And on Monday I took her to the pediatrician and said, there's something wrong with my daughter. And he said, let's take a blood test, and I'll call you this afternoon with the results. And he took the blood test, and he called me back in the afternoon, and he said, Mrs. Gibbs, we believe your daughter has leukemia. Here's what I need for you to do. I need you to put her in the car and gently sit her down. Do not put a seat harness on her. Do not put any pressure on her body anywhere because she could hemorrhage before you get to the hospital. And take her to Buffalo Children's Hospital immediately. And I did that. When I moved into my home, no one told me there was a landfill 3 blocks from my house. No one told me the school, the elementary school that was built. Elementary schools today, by the way, are being built on landfills. No one told me my child's elementary school, where Michael was going to kindergarten, was on top of 20,000 tons of chemicals. Because in today's world, you only know about the property you buy. You don't know about the property next door. It's not in a deed. I had no clue. So when I took Melissa to the hospital, and they put her in this makeshift sort of emergency room, surgical room, they explained to me that they had to do a bone marrow test to determine whether or not she had leukemia. And then they explained that they're going to put this needle into her hip and withdraw some bone marrow and look at it under a microscope. And then they said to me, but because of her blood count, we don't want to give her heavy anesthetic. So could you please calm her down and hold her down? And of course I would, because I'm her mother. And I went in there, and Melissa was on this bed. She's only 3. She was on this white hospital bed, and she was screaming. She was scared. She was frightened to death. Her nose started hemorrhaging. Her gums were hemorrhaging, bleeding. The blood vessels under her face were bursting, and there was blood everywhere. And I looked at my daughter, who was just screaming on the top of her lungs, and said, I can't do this. I can't hold her down. I can't calm her down. And I walked out of the room. And as I stood outside the door, I listened to my daughter say, please, Mama, please come get me. Take me home. I won't be bad no more. They're hurting me. I tell you the story not because my children suffered more than others. They did not. My children survived. I tell you this story because while this was happening to my family, and while it's happening to people's family in Birmingham, Alabama, in Savannah, Georgia, in California, in New York, in New Jersey, any state, just name it, while this was happening to me, like in all these other communities, the city of Niagara Falls, the county of Niagara, the state of New York, and the Environmental Protection Agency all knew we were being poisoned. They all knew we were being poisoned, and they made a conscious and deliberate decision to allow that to continue. A conscious and deliberate decision. When we're talking about environmental justice, we are talking about agencies and elected officials who are making deliberate and conscious decisions to poison people of low wealth, poison people of color. most people don't even know, because it never got printed in the media during the Love Canal struggle very often, is that there were 240 low-income units, townhouses, to the west of Love Canal. They were harmed as much as we were as property owners, but nobody heard about these 240 families who had to have 5 children to qualify for that housing. They had to have 5 children to get into that subsidized housing. How many of you heard about Griffin Manor families when you hear the story of Love Canal? No one. Because that's the other part of our society's sense of discrimination, and they don't care about people who are poor and people who are of color. And they make conscious and deliberate decisions to just forget about them, let them suffer, or make them suffer. This is not new. The reason I say they made a conscious and deliberate decision is not just my perspective. In 1976, 2 years before I found out about Love Canal, which was 1978 and 79, there was a report done by Calspan Associates, it's a consulting firm, where the state and EPA wanted to evaluate Love Canal because there were complaints. And this report talked about lots of different things and did a lot of studies and so forth and so on. And I read this report. It was mentioned in the newspaper. I went down to the reporter. I got the report. I'm looking at this report. They knew that we were being poisoned in 1976 and made the decision that it was perfectly okay. Not only did they make a decision, as they do again today in communities across the country, but in the back of the report was something that happens in every community called a cost-benefit analysis. In the back of the report, it said, here are some cleanup options, options to remedy the problem, the contaminants that were leaking out into our homes. I had 10 chemicals leaking into my basement that was measurable. One option is always do nothing, and then they had other ones. But the best option that was listed there was the option to put a clay cap over the top of the canal and a trench around the canal. That would keep chemicals from migrating laterally through the ground, and it would keep snow melt and rain from entering in. That cost in 1976 dollars was $20,000. $20,000. $20 million, sorry. $20 million, thank you. It was $20 million. So what did they do? They did their cost-benefit analysis based on $20 million. And the way they did that is they looked at the income of the families who lived at Love Canal. My husband, working at Goodyear, made $10,000 a year. My husband was worth $10,000 a year, just to simplify the math. My son was likely to follow in his daddy's footsteps, so he was worth $10,000 a year plus an inflation factor. Because I did not work outside of the home, I was worth nothing. And because Melissa was likely to follow in her mama's footsteps, she too was worth nothing. What they did is they put a price tag, and they do this every day in this country. They put a price tag on our heads, and they concluded at the end of this Calspan report that Love Canal families were not worth the $20 million investment to clean up the dump. How dare they? How dare they? My family is worth something. In communities across the country, low-wealth communities, communities of color primarily, they have a price tag on their head. Is it really worth cleaning up, millions of dollars of cleanup in Birmingham, Alabama, to protect families who are on state subsidies? The state of Alabama says no. Drummond and ABC Coke says no. They are not worth it. How do we live in a society a society who can say that you are only worth whatever financial money you can gain. This is not the America I grew up with. My mom and dad said everybody was equal, that people are important. My church says people are important. Why does our government do this? And our government does this every single day, all across the country. So at Love Canal, what we decided is that we needed to get out. We realized they don't care about us. And so we began to organize. Now, at first, we believed the system. And again, when you're working with people in the field, we believe the system worked. I don't know why we believe that. I honestly have no clue why we do believe that. But we did. And so what we thought we would do is if we just showed the government, who was just naive and not terribly bright, that we were being harmed, right? That they would do the right thing. That they would fix the problem. And so we went out and did a health study in community after community after community after community that I work with. That's mostly what the first step is that the communities take, is they do a health study, trying to prove why is a burden of proof of harm on the community as opposed to the polluters, as opposed to the government agency, as opposed to CDC or the health department or ATSDR or one of the, it's not their responsibility. It always ends up that the community has to raise the flag. So at Love Canal, we did a health study, and we found at Love Canal that 56% of our children were born with birth defects. 56% of our children had 3 ears, double rows of teeth, extra fingers, extra toes, or were mentally retarded. We found that the vast majority of women who were pregnant, trying to get pregnant, were unable to get pregnant, were having miscarriages, having stillborn babies. We did all these statistics, and we put them all together as a hypothesis, which I couldn't say back then, so I'm really proud of myself. Come a long way. We put it together to show the government that there's a problem, so they would come in and do their own study and verify the health results and so forth. So we took it to New York State Health Department. We provided it to David Axelrod, who was a health commissioner, and David Axelrod picked up the thing off the table and literally threw it on the floor and said it's useless housewife data collected by people who have a vested interest in the outcome. Why is it when Southern Power or Dow Chemical or DuPont or Goodyear presents these reports, they're always credible, right? They don't have a vested interest in the outcome. They're looked at as credible reports about things. But communities reports, with our limited tools that we have, are always seen as something that is just advocacy or wrong in some other way. Every single time. So I'm Irish. I don't know if there's other Irish in here, but I'm Irish. I picked up the report and said, you will look at this. and they said, no, it's useless housewife data. We're not looking at it. So we began to organize. We realized that it really isn't about, when you're looking at environmental justice issues, when you're looking at communities that are being poisoned, it's not about the science. 9 out of 10 times the science is there. It's about the politics. It's about the politics of how much are you worth. It's really what it comes down to. But it's about the politics. So we began to organize, and we organized all across the state. We did lots of news media. We framed our issues around people. You notice I don't say EPA, or I say David Axelrod, the Commissioner of Health. We made sure that everywhere we went, we targeted the person who had the decision-making authority. And we targeted them by name. You can't fight City Hall. City Hall is a big building, right? But you can fight Mayor O'Loughlin. Everybody knows Mayor O'Loughlin. Through doing this, we actually got the study done by the health department, and they came to Love Canal to present their study. And they stood on a stage like this, and they brought their statistician, their epidemiologist, and all the other ologists that you need for a study. They were all there, all the ologies. And then they started talking about the study and how they put it together and so forth. And then at the end, they said, and this is our results. They said that we found 56% of the children at Love Canal have birth defects. Just like the Homeowner Association. We're like, well, yeah, duh. Like, you think we're making this up? We found of the 22 women who were pregnant during the study period, only 4 normal babies were born. The rest of those pregnancies ended in miscarriages, stillborns, or birth defected children. And they went on with their whole list. And we're thinking at this point, we're thinking we are going to get relief now because they have demonstrated for themselves that a problem exists. And instead, they concluded by saying, however, we do not believe that the birth defects and problems at Love Canal are related to the Love Canal landfill. We believe that this is a community of genetically random, this is a random cluster of genetically defected people. Yeah, and then when in Arkansas, where the moms were, their babies were dying before they were 1 year of age, they had a baby cemetery in the middle of their neighborhood so they could visit their young babies who passed. They were drinking dioxin in the water from a paper mill. When the health department in Arkansas looked at the community there, they said because the women were primarily illiterate, they were feeding their children, instead of formula, Pine Sol. Do you ever smell Pine Sol? That stuff is nasty. Like, there ain't no mistake there. Everywhere we go and we talk with communities who demonstrate serious health impacts, there is always another reason. It is almost never the polluted air. It's almost never the polluted water. It's almost never the pollution. It is always something. It's either they're smokers, or they eat wrong, or they don't go for their annual physicals, or they do this, or they do that. It's always the victim's responsibility to prove that the victim is in fact a victim. So, since Love Canal, we won relocation, not only of the property owners, but of the 240 units of Griffin Manor and the families there, providing resources for people to be able to move, whether they were renters or property owners. We won that fight. But we found out a lot of things and learned a lot at Love Canal as a result of that. And some of the things that I think we need to address as we move in the future is we cannot keep using cost-benefit analysis when we're talking about human health impacts. If you want to do a cost-benefit analysis in building a new plant, Godspeed. But when you're talking about men, women, children, when you're talking about generations of people impacted by chemicals, it is not right, it's not even ethical to do that. We must change that in some way, or challenge it in a way that actually raises the conversation to the public, because most people don't understand that's how every decision gets made. We need to raise that up. We need to say that we do not put prices on people's head. My children were not worth $10,000. They're priceless. They're human beings. They're adding to society. The other thing we have to look at is what are we doing out there? So one of the things I was mentioning last night is how we make these decisions. How we make these decisions on so much. So right now, today, we are also, and I was just really blown away by this, we are also licensing companies, industries, to kill people. We are actually licensing companies to kill people. So everywhere there is a water discharge permit, or there's an air permit, or there's a landfill permit, whatever it might be, each one of these permits allow a certain amount of people to get sick. It actually licenses the company to poison people. And the way these permits are written is it looks at single chemicals, right? So you go to a facility, DuPont facility, they have hundreds of release pipes in the facility, hundreds of them. I think the one in Delaware has 1,300 discharge into the air pipes. Each one of those are permitted separately under a single chemical. Each one of those pipes release dozens of chemicals. And the community that lives around that one in Delaware is a low-income African-American community, not a surprise. Why do we do that? We do not look at the synergistic effect. We cannot permit a single chemical from a single discharge point. We need to look at the entire facility and what the entire facility is discharging. We need to look at the entire community and what other facilities or industries are discharging. And what does that whole look like? What does that whole look like? Our permitting process is really about environmental justice. What it says is people who live around these facilities are generally low income, mostly of color, and it's okay to poison them by doing this barbaric permit system. Children are much more vulnerable to chemicals than adults. In the Birmingham situation, which is a Coke facility with lead all over the place, what they say in the Birmingham to the parents who have children there is that do not allow your children to play in the dirt. Do not have your children inadvertently breathe in the dirt. Don't know how you do that. To have your children strip down to their underwear when they come in so that you don't track this chemical into the house. How many 12-year-old children are going to stand at the door with the little brother and take their clothes off? Why is it their responsibility? Why is it their responsibility to make sure their children don't play in the dirt? Where are the children supposed to play? Why is it their responsibility to make sure the clothes get dropped at the front door so they don't contaminate the entire house, as if that's not going to happen anyhow, by the way? Open a window. Why is it their responsibility? We need to fix that. We need to fix that in a way that helps people who have been victims of this pollution for decades. So one of the things we were talking about last night is that when we talk about this in the field, one of the things we really talk about is that these permits are sort of like a hunting or fishing license. Anybody do hunting or fishing? So when you do the hunting and fishing license, these licenses are actually framed around the reproductive and the young deer or whatever you're hunting or fishing, right? So if you have a hunting license and you're going deer hunting, you cannot take the babies. You are not allowed, it is illegal to shoot the babies. It is illegal to shoot the mothers. Yet in our permitting of chemicals for families in this country, it is the babies, it is the pregnant women who are most vulnerable that the permit process does not address. The permit process does not address pregnant women and infant children. And so we need to change that, because fundamentally That's one of the biggest problems. So since Love Canal, I have been working across the country. We have worked in over 10,000 communities across the country. We have done health studies, we have done legal actions, we have done a lot. And you know, one of my saddest and favorite court case is we went to the Supreme Court in Ohio. There is an African American community that has an incinerator right in the middle of it. This incinerator is polluting the entire community. It's been cited. This incinerator, in its 10 years of life, was only one quarter in 10 years was it in compliance. 1 quarter in 10 years. So we went to shut it down during the permit process. And it was really interesting because the judges were really nice. They were just nice human beings. We filled the room with all of the neighbors. The judge says, I've never seen so many people in my courtroom before. Well, there was a reason, Your Honor. We tried the case. We showed that they weren't in compliance but 1 quarter in their entire life, and they ruled against us. And they ruled against us because they said there is nothing for them to hang their hats on. That's what the judge said. And it's like, what does that mean? In Ohio, the law says that if you have a permit and you're out of compliance, but you have a plan to come into compliance, you're not considered out of compliance. So they could stay, and they still, this is now 10 years later, that facility has only been in compliance 3 quarters in its life. But because it says it has a plan to come into compliance, then it can still run. The Attorney General in the state of Pennsylvania filed a lawsuit against the state of Ohio because that same facility is polluting Pennsylvania because it's never been in compliance. How can we live in a country when that can happen? How can we live in a country where an industry does not behave like they're supposed to, right? And yet, it's okay. Those families are sick. Those children have cancer. They had to close the elementary school because the stack comes up and over the ridge and the smoke went right into the elementary school. They had to close the school and build a new school. Whose responsibility was it to build a new school? The city of East Liverpool. Not Heritage, not EPA, not the state of Ohio. It was the city's responsibility to build a new school because they could not put children in that school because of the incinerator. These are things we have to change. They're fundamental. We're really talking about something like permits. Those are fundamental. How do we, over the next 10 years or however long, how do we change that? How do we make people as a center as opposed to a cost-benefit number? How do we make people who live in a community, in the communities that are most vulnerable, how do we take that vulnerability of a community and add 10 points or add something so they get a little extra, right? Because they don't have the same thing that a wealthier community has. They don't have the accessibility to health care. They don't have the accessibility to good food in many cases and so forth. And they can't grow their own gardens because they're all polluted, right? How do we do this? Because if we don't stop and change the way the decisions are being made, then nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change. Those coal ash piles will keep on piling, and the next storm that comes through will wash them over into the rivers. It just is going to keep on happening. So in the next 40 years, I'm going to retire at some point, but over the next 40 years, 20 years, 30 years for the Goldman Prize, I think that we really have to figure out, especially those of you who are in law school, who understand the legal jargon stuff, which I can't get my arms around, how do we do that? How do we make those changes? What will it take? And I can help with the messaging. I can help with the outreach. I have friends like Wand all over the country who have their own mailing list of people. We can help with the public opinion. We can help with the narrative and the framing. We just need somebody to help figure out how do we do that. Because fundamentally, the hunting licenses for industry is taking away our children and our most vulnerable populations. And that just has to stop. So that is my mission for you. So if you're looking for the future, I suggest that's a real good place to start and see what you can do. I believe we can do this, by the way. I totally believe we can change all of this. Nobody knew about Love Canal 40 years ago, right? We not only got Superfund and got evacuated, but Love Canal opened the eyes of the world to the impacts of health from chemical pollution. New studies, new science emerged out of that. A new movement of environmental health and impacts came out of that. I mean, before that, it was, mostly the natural environment. The Big 10 groups, the green groups, were working on rivers and streams and forests, and all of that's good and needs to be worked on. I'm not suggesting we don't. But Love Canal said, what about the people? And people started paying attention to the people. So if we can do all of that in this short time, really, it's only been 40 years, and I know that sounds like a long time, especially those of you who are not 40 yet, but it was really a relatively short time to get from where we were to where we are now. 40 years ago, most of the science on human health and exposure to chemicals were only in the workplace. 160-pound man, 40 hours a week. That was it. Now it's not so. So we can do this, and I think fundamentally what we have to do is not just fight and put these fires out all across the country, but we really need to look at the basis of decisions and how can we change that, and then once we figure that out, how can we get that message out to people and demand that change? We can win that if we are all on the same message, on the same narrative, agree to the same change, or at least the vast majority of us. And we can protect people that we are not protecting now, and we will have less and less people who are impacted by chemical pollution. So that is a challenge I put out to you, and I'm happy to help you to achieve it. So I'm going to stop there so we have some time for question and answer. Yeah? So I'm going to stop there if you have any questions or comments. Well, we don't have a lot of success, unfortunately. Two things. Let me start here. When there's litigation moving forward, especially on health impacts, health-related impacts, most of the attorneys in toxic torts do not want us to organize because we'll mess up their case. Because their client is going to go in front of the media and say that they had cancer. Yes, they have cancer in their family, but they don't think it's connected, and it's going to blow their case. So our first push is really to try and meet with the attorneys to really talk to them about what can we say, what can't we say, and how do we build this together? Because it's much more powerful if you have the community involved as well. But the first struggle is to get and some attorneys just will not play. And other attorneys will. So in St. Louis, the attorneys working on the suit there on behalf of the families who live across from a radioactive waste site and a burning landfill. When the landfill reaches when the fire in the landfill meets the radioactive waste, they think it's going to be a Chernobyl-like event, right? So the attorneys there are working with the community because they know it's urgent, and they've been doing some testing, and we've been organizing around there, around Senator Blunt and some of the people who have power. But it's really hard. It's really hard. Mostly what we try to do is, and that's the toxic tort piece, the personal injury. If we're just organizing to fight back and get a cleanup or something like that, it's a whole different ball of wax. So in those situations, we do organize the community. We do work with the attorneys. And some of the cases we've done, you know, actually the one we did at Love Canal, I could give you the other ones too, but the one at Love Canal, so we filed a lawsuit to stop the cleanup. Do not allow them to clean up the site. We knew we were going to lose that suit, right? Because stopping the cleanup meant more people would be exposed, more waste would go into the community. It was a bigger risk, right? So, but what we filed that lawsuit knowing, and that's the other thing, attorneys want to win. Guys, you don't have to win them all. And attorneys always want to win. I mean, that's what they want to do, right? Sometimes you don't win the case, but you put the case out there, and it has to have legitimacy, obviously, so that you can win something else. So we knew we were going to lose that case, but what we wanted to win was through negotiation. So what we did get, instead of stopping it, is the state, because it was against the state of New York, who was going forward in EPA. We won a technical consultant who could be on site during cleanup the entire time and had authority to blow the whistle if he thought something was awry or dangerous. We won child care for our children to be removed from the area during construction time so they wouldn't be breathing in the chemicals. We won psychological help, mental help, for our families who were dealing with the stress and having a hard time. So we had mental health experts who were available all the time. And so we had, I can't remember all of them, but we had like 15 demands. And we won, an office and a phone. We got an office, a phone, and a copier. So we could communicate with the local. So the suit was really, we put the bar way up here, but what we really knew we wanted to win was these other things, and it has worked. And we've done similar cases like that in other places. The other two things that are really interesting, so when you do it with the community, the lawyer disappears, right? In the sense of when the case is being filed, it's not the lawyer on the steps of the courthouse filing the case, it's the community on it doing the press release about it. So it's really community focused as opposed to attorney focused. Some attorneys have problems with that. And then the other thing we do, and especially in the cases we know we're going to lose the big one, but we could win some little ones, we have t-shirts. And so we ask the community to come, we tell them they're going to lose, because the lawyers generally know this, right? We're going to lose, and they all put their t-shirts on, and they leave and do a press conference with the t-shirts on. And so, you know, one case it was, Joe was right. Joe was a guy who wasn't going to be part of the lawsuit because he said it was hopeless, right? And it was a story, it was a human interest story in a local newspaper that we planted. And so everybody walked out with Joe was right. You know, law doesn't equal justice. And so, you know, that's another way, and the community comes together, and they feel, even though they lose, they feel whole. They feel like, you know, family. So I think community organizing is really important. I think it's really hard for the attorneys to deal with that, and I get that. But I think that maybe you should do a class on how do you do that, and how do you work with that, because I think that would be really important, because it is more valuable. Other questions or comments? Yeah, thank you. So something young people can do, and you know, I really think that spending time in these communities, really getting to know them, going door to door, talking with folks. I think one of the things that most of the communities we work with that are low wealth, they don't have tweets, and they might have Facebook they work on. They need a lot of ability, skills to help raise their message and their power. So the one in Birmingham, for example, they're trying to get the governor to do something, to have it listed as a Superfund site. But they don't know how to do that, right? They don't know how to do a petition. They don't know how to do the online stuff. They don't know how to get it out. They don't know how to message it. Most of them, are really insecure about their writing. And so, the skills that you have, the research skills that you all have, the skills to get out there in sort of the social media sort of network, I think that is so helpful to people. But I think if you can't do a class, then you should go to a community and just spend 4 or 5 days there, or a long weekend. A long weekend's coming up this weekend, right? A long weekend there, and introduce yourself and say, what can I do? Do you want me to go door to door and hand out your flyers? I mean, it's the best way to sort of understand the pulse of the community, what's going on in the community, and how you can help. Because there's these general things I could give you, but really each community is individual and have different needs. And the community in Birmingham, when we had a meeting there, they turned out 250 people, right? There were only 3 cars in the parking lot. One of them was mine. So they were going on buses. They needed money for bus passes, right? And so each community has a different need, and that's what I suggest you. You really want to do environmental law, you need to find out what that looks like at the ground. You really do. I think I'd... Thank you. Citizen science is the question, how is it used in sharing some stories? Citizen science is extraordinary, actually. It's really, people have been doing a thing called the bucket brigade, and that's like these big buckets, and you suck the air into these buckets over a period of time, and then you send that canister to get tested. It's like $200. And it really tells you what's in that air. And although that's not sort of legal, you can't use it in a court of law, for example, what it does is you can use it in the court of public opinion. That we had these buckets sitting around here, and every single one of them were full of benzene, above the level that's suggested for air and protection of health. So that's been really good. The same is happening in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, around fracking. So people are actually taking water samples and really monitoring these fracking facilities. There is I don't know what it's called, it's like an infrared camera that can actually, the communities rent, or there's a couple of them out there that they loan each other, which is really kind of cool. So you point the camera at the fracking well, a hydrofracking well for natural gas, for those who don't know, and it can show you the emissions coming out. It's a different color. It's really cool. You can also use that in refineries and places like that as well, where there's emissions coming out. And then when you videotape it, and then you take it to a legislator or you take it to a regulator, suddenly you have some evidence. It's not hard evidence. You can't use it in court, but you can use it in the court of public opinion. And people will say, oh yeah, you're right. Because you can't see methane coming out of a well. You just can't see it, and you can't smell it in many cases. So these have really been very useful. The other thing that's been, as much as the health study is not practical in the sense of, demonstrating things, because you can't verify all the health impacts, doing the health survey does two things in a community. One, it answers a big question. Every community has a question of, do we really have a problem, or is it my imagination? And then the other question it answers is, does this organization care about me? So part of door knocking and getting that information is building the relationship and the trust with people in your community, so you can then move them to do organizing or protesting or whatever you want. So that is one big element. And then the other is, do we really have a problem here, or is it our imagination? And I find that to be incredibly useful. Are we done? Got that one? Yeah, it is true that they're not in the trenches, so to speak, for the most part. The big green groups. There's one of the big problems is there's fundamentally different goals between the grassroots groups and the green groups, NRDC, Environmental Defense, whoever you want to name. The green groups are really, their goal is control, right? Because they're always working on policy and regulations. How much can we release in the air? How much can we release in the water? How much can we leave in the soil? And, you know, zero is a non-starter on the hill. So they can't go there. Where the community is not about control and numbers and how much we can tolerate as a human or an environment, communities are about zero. Like, we can do something different. We don't need this chemical. We can use a different chemical that's non-toxic or whatever, but their goal is zero. So that's one fundamental difference, is that they're really coming from different places. And so, you know, they'll go into a community often and say, you can't get zero. And this is like a big green group coming in and say you can't win. It's like, yikes, right? So that's part of the problem. And the lawsuits that they do, which are extraordinary, and this is not to put them down, they do great work. The lawsuits they do have to have far-reaching, you know, impacts, and most of these community fights do not. Where they can fit in and be helpful, I think, is really in these permit fights. Because one of the things that communities have to do when a permit comes up for renewal is they have a comment period. Well, they barely can read the permits, let alone understand what they're saying. And so I think to provide that service to communities, to be able to read it and to talk about the limitations and the good parts of it. I mean, they're not all bad. To really give that to folks so that they can understand it and then help them write their comments in lay terms so they can be shared with other lay audiences. I think that would just be incredible, because every community has something like that, right? They have a permit they have to fight. The cleanups, you know, there's other groups who can help with the cleanup, but the regulatory and policy stuff is something they understand, they can wrap their arms around, and they could be helpful. And I've often suggested that they have 3 people who are just like on-call clinic, right? They're going to do this permit in Ohio, so can you help these folks out? And they're not going to be able to help everybody, but somehow they'll have to prioritize, as we do at our office. But that would be incredibly helpful. That's the only place I could find that would really fit, because it is about their goals as well as a community goal. So thank you. Thank you.